let's talk about how to plan out a data visualization. I find this is a very common place where people get stuck. Everybody wants a chart, but they don't know what data to plot. You can make any chart you like, and that can be a bit overwhelming. When you read a paper and they plot the data, oftentimes the conclusion is obvious, but that can give the false impression that any chart can give you an insight. And if you just keep making enough charts, eventually it will be clear. The reality is, like most things in research, success in data visualization requires careful planning from the beginning. Where I think people go wrong with making charts is in understanding the purpose of a chart. Think about a chart like the primary points of your argument, demonstrating the claims you are trying to make in the paper. If the chart is too complex, your point may be unclear, distracted by unnecessary details. Alternatively, if you do not include enough in the chart, there might not be much information provided. A good data visualization is a balancing act between the two, trying to clarify the primary points made without irrelevant extra information. Start by figuring out the conclusions you would like to put in the discussion, and then think about what chart would allow you to comment on those conclusions. Another reason I think chart making can confuse people is because some researchers only make a chart after the data are collected. It may sound counterintuitive, but I generally recommend drafting charts in the research design phase to plan out in advance what the chart would look like if your hypothesis is correct. This is important because if we can create a mock-up version of the chart before you have any data, you can verify whether or not you are actually collecting the data you need to answer your question. Additionally, this is an opportunity to think through all the logistics of the research. Which groups are relevant to compare to which other groups? And comparisons made in terms of what outcome? If the results are the way you hypothesize, what would that look like in data? All these details are implied by the chart. So if you can draft a mock-up chart in advance, you can make sure the research aims make sense and have alignment with the data that you are collecting. That's the big picture. Let's talk about more specifics. There's all kinds of different charts you can make. And I don't have a problem if you want to get fancy, but as mentioned before, an unnecessarily complex chart is not a helpful chart. You want a chart that clearly presents the main points you are trying to make in the research paper. For that reason, I honestly prefer to make bar charts. Bar charts are simple. You can have as many bars as you like on the x-axis, and the y-axis gives the average of the outcome. And there can be as many groups as are relevant to your research question. I like a bar chart because it is simple. It presents just the relevant information and nothing else that could be a distraction. The other chart I usually make is a line chart. A line chart is basically the same as a bar chart. The difference is rather than having a unique bar for each group on the x-axis, you connect the groups on the x-axis, creating a line. The value of this is if you wanted to discuss results in the form of a continuous change or a linear association. If, for example, you looked at rates of an infection over time and you're worried about an outbreak occurring, you could have a bar chart where each month in the data set is its own bar, or you could have one line connecting all the months together. And if the line is increasing, that would imply that there are increasing rates of the infection you're worried about, an outbreak unrolling over time. Line charts can be especially helpful if you had multiple groups tracked over time. If, for example, you looked at infection rates in two areas and wanted to compare the hypothesis that infections are only increasing for one of the two areas. A bar chart would be difficult because the bars would overlap. And with a line chart, you can just have two lines drawn right next to each other and directly compare them. There is one last chart that we should talk about. That's the box and whisker plot. A box and whisker plot is, in some ways, the same as a bar chart, but there's a little bit more information provided. In a bar chart, the bar just simply goes up to the average for the group on the x-axis. You can add a confidence interval around that average if you like, but that's more or less it. A box plot tries to present information on not just where the average is, but also variation around the average. The result is a box rather than a bar. The width of the box represents where the middle 50% of the data are. Additionally, there will usually be a horizontal black line where the median is, so the middle value within the middle 50% of the data. This is helpful because you can compare the height of the boxes between groups on the x-axis to see which averages are higher and lower. But you can also compare how wide the boxes are, aware that there may be some variation in data. And this helps give a sense of overlap in the primary data between the two groups. Lastly, there are the whiskers. The length of the whiskers is based on the variation in the data, and just tries to characterize the overall spread of the data beyond the middle 50%. This gives an overview of which data points were most common for a single group, as well as how the groups compared. The result is similar to a bar chart, it's just more context provided, based on the variation that was typical for each group. That's it. Those are the main charts I tend to use. In terms of planning, it's not too hard. First, you just need to think about what the x and y axes represent. On the x-axis, if this is a bar chart or a box and whisker plot, we usually have the groups compared. And if this is a line chart, there'll be a continuous range of values you want to examine. On the y-axis is just the outcome, where we can plot the average of the outcome for each group or each value of the continuous range. And that's why I recommend creating mock-up versions of charts in advance. The chart itself is usually simple enough. As we'll see in the next section, software can handle the details for us. More challenging is figuring out what to actually plot. Which groups and what outcome are relevant to the research question? If this is a continuous association, what range of values do you want to focus on? And how can you ensure you actually represent that full range of values in the primary data? By drafting the chart in advance, you know the data you will need, as well as how you will analyze the data once they are collected.